your money and go elsewhere, right? So it's not a question of should we bring capital back to the downtown. I think we should. The question is how much and what kind of capital. I think the idea that you can only make money by serving this particular kind of customer may not be true, right? And so that's the question. So what might that look like? What might an alternative strategy look like? And I think that's a very important question that we've been trying to deal with in this class. Salome?
Okay, first of all, thank you to all the presenters. My question is directed at Douglas, but perhaps others might want to interject. I was really kind of fascinated by this notion of atypical gentrification. And oftentimes I think one of the most drastic implications of traditional gentrification is displacement. So kind of in the absence of displacement, in Geneva, are there other implications of atypical gentrification, maybe beyond just exclusion, that that may arise from this very specific form of gentrification?
Yeah, I mean, I think atypical gentrification, so to give everyone a kind of definition of what typical gentrification is conceived as, is if you think of something like Harlem, you have the gradual pushing up of the places that are, so let me put it this way. So people move to an area because it's already been identified as a place that's safe or hip to live in, right? And this is also something that establishes the identity of the people who move there. So typical gentrification is primarily focused on is this moving of upper class residents to a safe area. So if you look back into the presentation, you'll see that Geneva was characterized as a criminal area. And that's not a place that we see downtown Geneva being anymore. But being that it's atypical gentrification, there has nothing to do with people moving there. In fact, there's no space to physically move there. What you could say is that the types of store owners and the shops that they open is the equivalent of that. And but what this primarily means is that it's the products you have to look at. And this is something that Carly was focusing on very much. And what these products are, how expensive they are, but first and foremost, how they shape that identity. So this is everything to do with identity politics. And I believe, maybe not Professor Costa, but economics comes secondary. And you'll see that you have these people in downtown struggle with this notion. In some of the interviews, you had a store owner saying, yes, I love the summertime tourists coming in here, business is great, but I really hate when they start telling me how to do my job and they think that they're better than me because they have this air of affluence around them. And this is the kind of dichotomy that they have to navigate. This proliferation of business is good for their downtown and good for their business in particular, but the erosion of their identity is also at place, or the reshaping of their identity. So do they reject this completely and say, I'm not going to be part of that, which, as Professor Costa said, isn't really feasible because you need capital, right, to exist as a business. So then the question is, what do they do? How much capital do they take? Or how do they reconstruct their business? Or who reconstructs their business? And so that's what the atypical part of gentrification implies. So maybe other than the culture, it's identity politics. That could be the other thing that's implicit in that word.
Can I just ask a follow-up to that? So is it typical, this is just a question out of ignorance, is it typical then that typical gentrification are places where capital influx then pushes out, marginalizes businesses that existed, wherein in Geneva, what might also be atypical, and I'm not sure, I'm kind of trying to test this out. The atypical piece is there were a lot of empty storefronts, so there wasn't necessarily a driving out like the big box stores that come in and there's now a Gap downtown. It's not displacing businesses that existed. There weren't businesses, so it's really just a kind of like almost not totally, but a blank slate from which to build up an identity of Geneva or a culture of Geneva. Is that true, or am I off on that?
I think two things could happen. One is that, so yes, there's lots of vacant storefronts and those might get filled by affluent places. But this isn't to say that places that cater to local residents who aren't affluent don't exist. They're
Right.
still very much there.
Right,
So the one
absolutely,
thing is
yeah.
that those places could disappear with
Ah.
rent prices driving up, right? Better places,
Okay.
richer customers, it's just classic capitalism.
Right,
But the
okay.
second thing, the piece of information that I didn't include, is that people tend to only shop in downtown once a day. A lot of the data that I didn't include, because I couldn't, because my frame was downtown, was that they are going to the big box stores along 5 and 20. They are going to Walmart and Wegmans and Peebles and all of these places to do their shopping, not in downtown, but in places that cater to the average person of Geneva. So the second possibility is that if these two phenomena combined, you have places that don't cater to locals in downtown, and then locals start going outside of downtown to do all of their shopping, their eating, etc. And
That's
so
interesting.
then downtown becomes not only exclusive in terms of the stores, but also who's going there, which is what we learned in Costa's class, terrible.
Yeah, okay.
Because actually, they figured this out on their own. So it is atypical because, well, you have a little bit of Section 8 housing that's being luxuried up. A lot of my colleagues now live downtown. And when I first arrived here 2 years ago, people were saying, that's the ghetto, man, are you sure? Like, these were my colleagues who said it. So the perception is already changing.
Okay.
But Salome was right. It is atypical in the sense that because there are so many empty stores, the question of pushing stores out isn't there yet.
Right.
But the question that's there right now is the emerging incompatibility of uses, where the downtown gets branded a certain way,
I see.
and it becomes symbolically inhospitable to other uses.
I get what you're saying, yeah.
Right. We do have at least another 5 minutes. I have questions, but I'll hold back and see.